Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamine. Krishna Gauranga
Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Jashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. So, welcome to our today evening Bhagavad Gita class. We'll be reading from Bhagavad Gita as it is, chapter 2, verse 51. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, chapter is entitled Contents of the Gita Summarized, and we are in the midst of this section of Nishkam Karma Yoga. Let's start with a recitation of the verse. Karmajam buddhi yuktahi. Karmajam buddhi yuktahi. Palam tyaktva manishinaha. Palang tyaktva manishinaha. Chanma bandha vinirmukta. Chanma bandha vinirmukta. Padang gachanti anamayam. Karmajam buddhi yuktahi. Palam tyaktva manishinaha. Chanma bandha vinirmukta. Padang gachanti anamayam. Please, devotees. Karmajam buddhi yuktahi. Palam tyaktva manishinaha. Chanma bandha vinirmukta. Padam gachanti anamayam. Karmajam buddhi yuktahi. Palam tyaktva manishinaha. Chanma bandha vinirmukta. Padam gachanti anamayam. Karmajam buddhi yuktahi. Palam tyaktva manishinaha. Chanma bandha vinirmukta. Padam gachanti anamayam. Word by word. Karmajam, due to fruitive activities. Buddhi yuktaha, being engaged in devotional service. He, certainly. Palam, results. Tyaktva, giving up. Manishinaha, great sages or devotees. Janma bandha, from the bondage of birth and death. Vinirmukta, liberated. Padam, position. Gachanti, they reach. Anamayam, without miseries. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. By thus engaging in the devotional service to the Lord, great sages or devotees free themselves from the results of work in the material world. In this way, they become free from the cycle of birth and death and attain the state beyond all miseries by going back to Godhead. Purport. The liberated living entities belong to that place where there are no material miseries. The Bhagavatam 10:14-58 says, Samashritaye padapala plavam mahat padam punyaya shomurare pavam buddhir vatsa padam param padam 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 yatvipadam natesham. For one who has accepted the abode of the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the shelter of the cosmic manifestation, and is famous as Mukunda, or the giver of Mukti, the ocean of the material world is like the water contained in a calf's footprint. Parampadam, or the place where there are no material miseries, or Vaikuntha, is his goal, not the place where there is danger in every step of life. Owing to ignorance, one does not know that this material world is a miserable place, where there are dangers at every step. Out of ignorance only, less intelligent persons try to adjust to the situation by fruitive activities, thinking that the resultant actions will make them happy. They do not know that no kind of material body anywhere within the universe can give life without miseries. The miseries of life, namely birth, death, old age, and diseases, are present everywhere within the material world. But one who understands his real constitutional position as the eternal servitor of the Lord, and thus knows the position of the personality of Godhead, engages himself in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. Consequently, he becomes qualified to enter into the Vaikuntha planets, where there is neither material miserable life, nor the influence of time and death. To know one's constitutional position means to know also the sublime position of the Lord. One who wrongly thinks that the living entity's position and the Lord's position are on the same level is to be understood to be in darkness and therefore unable to engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. He becomes the Lord himself and thus paves the way for the repetition of birth and death. But one who, understanding that his position is to serve, transfers himself to the service of the Lord, at once becomes eligible for Vaikuntha Loka. Service for the cause of the Lord is called Karma Yoga, or Buddhi Yoga, or in plain words, devotional service to the Lord. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swam Padantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalang Shri Gurun Vaishnavangscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanjana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, once again the verse, translation. By thus engaging in devotional service to the Lord, great sages or devotees free themselves from the results of work in the material world. In this way they become free from the cycle of birth and death and attain the state beyond all miseries by going back to Godhead. Hare Krishna. So, like I said in the beginning, we're still in this section of Nishkam Karma Yoga, or also called Buddhi Yoga, and like Prabhupada says in plain words, devotional service to the Lord. So it's very interesting. We spoke about that a little bit before, and I think other classes also mentioned this point that actually Prabhupada was very much fond of putting bhakti to the forefront of the whole Bhagavad Gita, but especially in this second chapter, there's a lot of verses with yoga in it, with karma yoga or buddhi yoga, and Prabhupada just straight away translates them into bhakti yoga, into devotional service. So he makes very clear what the essence is of this book. And in the beginning I was quite bothered by it, to be honest. Like, why is he doing this? Or like, it doesn't say this. So when we say, everything, we take these books and we take it literally. We don't do what the Mayavadis do. They change words and everything, right? That's what Prabhupada always says, they juggle with words. So doesn't Prabhupada do the same? And over time I really understood like the need of the hour, and Prabhupada's mood forced him to do that. And it's actually really nice to see, because that's why it's Bhagavad Gita as it is. It has to be stressed because there's so many other translations that are just way beyond what it's actually about. And actually, interestingly enough, what strengthened my faith also was that in university, when I was there in the Indology department, the head of that department, the professor, she also wrote a commentary on Bhagavad Gita. But she's like very well known, and she also, I think even she was teaching here at the University of London somewhat, Oxford or whatever. And in any case, she's also very much highlighting, this book is about the relationship between the person, the human being, and God. And it's about this relationship, and bhakti is highlighted throughout the text. So even the scholars actually, they appreciate this and confirm it. So it's not, in the beginning I was thinking maybe it's just, this is what every sect would do, they would put their thing in the forefront and just say this is how it is. But it's actually a fact that is established by Prabhupada, of course, authoritatively coming from the disciplic succession, but also confirmed from other sources outside our movement. So in this verse particularly, we see how the sages actually detach themselves from the results of work and thereby go back to home, back to Godhead, because they don't accrue any more karma. It's interesting that actually, Baladev Vidyabhushan, he writes about it that Manishina, the word that is used here, the sage, is actually the realizer of Atma. And because knowledge of Atma causes knowledge of Paramatma to sprout, it also means it is the cause to reach Vaikuntha, to gain knowledge about Vaikuntha. So if we are concerned with studying our own Atma ourselves, then we come to the Paramatma and then also to the Vaikuntha, like this. In the Bhakti Shastra, we were just speaking about different kinds of knowledge. Maybe those in the back, they remember, or maybe Sam also, a little longer back. There was different kinds of confidential knowledge. Do you remember in the second chapter, what is the confidential knowledge? There's the confidential knowledge, more confidential knowledge, most confidential knowledge. Somebody remembers? Not directly. That was what Antaranga said, I think. We had class with him. He mentioned this, that confidential knowledge, no, it was Paramakaruna Prabhu. Confidential knowledge is described in the second chapter and third chapter as well. And it's basically just establishing the difference between matter and spirit. So it's already confidential because it's spiritual. In this sense, it has to do with Brahman, right? To realize we're Brahman. So it's a nice point. And then more confidential knowledge is presented in the 7th chapter, where Krishna speaks about him and his energies, especially, how one can see him and perceive him in the world. And then most confidential is in the, which chapter? 9th chapter, which is the Raja Vidya Raja Guyam, like the top secret of all secrets, and the most confidential because it speaks about pure devotional service. So like that we have different grades of confidentiality and of knowledge. And we get informed that actually, Bhakti Yoga is the highest knowledge. And what does it mean actually if we compare karma, jnana and bhakti, these main yogas that are described in Bhagavad Gita, is that karma yoga is the yoga of action, right? You do activities and connect them to Krishna. Then jnana yoga, you refrain from action, that's kind of the conclusion. And bhakti yoga is then in action. right? That's also another verse which is kind of mind-boggling in the beginning. I think it's 4th chapter, 20 or something, that the one who sees action in inaction and inaction in action, he sees truly. So the bhakti yogis, they actually engage in activities, but they don't get karma, and that's why it's transcendental, it's spiritual. So, and that's why what is described here, that's why Nishkam Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga or Buddhi Yoga are actually the same. Because although a person acts, he doesn't get the results. So, not exactly same, but you can link them very much, as Prabhupada does in his purports and also in translations. So, but just because I was inspired of what we went through in Bhakti Shastri, I wanted to a little bit elaborate on that point, which Prabhupada also brings up here, because he mentions this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, 10:14:58. I just read once again the translation. For one who has accepted the abode of the lotus feet of the Lord, who is the shelter of the cosmic manifestation and is famous as Mukunda, or the giver of mukti, the ocean of the material world is like the water contained in a calf's footprint. Parampadam, or the place where there are no material miseries, or Vaikunta, is his goal, not the place where there is danger in every step of life. Padam, padam, yatvi padam, natesham, yeah? I like this, a lot of padam. Like at every step there is danger, right? We know this in our daily lives. So, but the point is, do you know from which chapter this is? Or who is speaking here? Yeah, I also wouldn't know, but I checked. But it's actually a very nice pastime, and I wanted to relate a little bit about it. It's Brahma speaking, after being very much bewildered. Brahma Vimohana Lila. And I think it's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, one of the acharyas, I'm not sure, who says all these leelas have different reasons, or like what they should provoke in the reader, right? And for this leela, it's that the Lord is inconceivable. And we try to figure him out by our little intelligence, but we don't get there. And we were just speaking about this, that the most confidential knowledge in the 9th chapter is very much in this direction as well. There are these verses where Krishna says, Maya idam tatam sarvam chagata vyakta murtina matstani sarvabhutani na chaham tesha vasita. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded, and all living beings are in me, but I'm not in them. And then he goes on, but they are also not in me. And then he says, yes, again, like this. He's playing with this a little bit, just for us to see, we cannot really perceive or conceive him in this way of mental speculation. So, and the same thing happened to Brahma, in this Brahma Vimohana Lila. And I just wanted to a little bit speak about this pastime also, because it's evening and it's nice to hear some Krishna Lila, right? So, probably you're already familiar with it, so I maybe won't go into all the details, but imagine this, it's the story after Aghasura, the giant snake. And actually, the story of Aghasura wasn't told to the inhabitants of Raj for 1 whole year, because they took a nap. They were kidnapped. Exactly, yeah, they were kidnapped. Right, that's the thing. So, after this whole pastime with Aghasura, the boys and Krishna, they went to the forest, and they came on a very nice sandy bank on the Yamuna. Yamuna Tira Vanachari, he's walking on the banks of the Yamuna in the forest there. And Krishna says, "Whoa, look at this beautiful place. There is the lotus spreading his fragrance and the birds chirping. Let us sit here and have some rest, take our lunch together here." And so that's what they did. The Gopas were very fond of having some lunch. They were all very hungry after this exciting pastime. So they sat down and they were eating, laughing and joking. And it's described that Prabhupada is describing so beautiful in Krishna book, how Krishna was sitting in the center and all the boys were sitting around him, and he was just like the whirl of the lotus, and the Gopas were like the petals of the lotus flower. So they were all sitting there laughing, joking, having a good time. And at that time the calves, which they let loose to graze around, they all of a sudden disappeared out of sight. And the gopas became very much agitated, and they screamed out. What would they scream out always? Krishna! And Prabhupada describes so nice, As soon as they cried out Krishna, they transcended their agitation and all their fear, and it was like everything gone. And then, but Krishna, what did he do? He said, okay, I will take care of this. You sit here, don't become disturbed, you just go on having your lunch, and I'm looking for the calves. So he goes into the forest, but he can't find the calves, right? And he comes back to the place where the gopas are sitting, but they are not sitting anymore there. So and then he understands pretty quickly, because he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, well, Brahma is behind this mischief. He stole the calves. So let's teach this guy a little lesson. Who is who here? And so he took the form of all these calves and gopas, which is so mind-boggling to understand. And what was the reason? He didn't want to go back to the village and tell the mothers that their sons have been kidnapped. So he goes back with all the gopas into Vrindavan, and they come there, and the mothers wait for them, and also the cows wait for their calves. And the thing is, it seems like they're not the same anymore, because the mothers, they're even more attracted to their children, and also the cows, they're totally affectionate. And of course, as always in these moments, a lot of milk is flowing from everywhere, from the calves, from the cows, but also from the mother's breasts. And so Prabhupada writes that the love of the cows and the mothers, it just increased causelessly, but also very naturally. And Krishna also in this way could serve the elder gopis, to express the love for him. Usually he's always with the younger gopis, right? But in this way he could also have some sweet exchange with them. So this went on, and for almost 1 year, right? They would go every day to the pasturing grounds with the cows, and the love was increasing ever more every day. And then, after almost 1 year, Krishna and Balaram, they were observing the gopas, and Balaram noticed something strange, because what happened is that there was on the Govardhan hill, the cowherd men were there with the bigger cows, because they're in charge of the bigger cows, whereas the gopas, they take care of the calves, right? So all of a sudden Balaram sees how the cows are just running down Govardhan in this valley where the gopas and the calves are. And actually these calves, they are not their children, they're not their calves. But somehow or other, they're just so mad after them, and they run down and they lick them, and the cowherd men get very agitated. Hey, what are they doing? They can't do nothing, can't hold them back. And then they run behind them, but when they are there, then they also get captivated by the gopas that are there. And they're so affectionate towards them, and Balaram is thinking, what is going on here? This is strange. It's it shouldn't be like this. And then he asks Krishna, and what is going on? And Krishna explains to him that actually what had happened. And then, at the end of this year, Brahma comes back. The cowherd boys and Krishna are again at the Yamuna. And Brahma comes back only after a moment, right, it's said. You know the exact span? A Truti was going by, which means in our worldly time here, it's 13,500 of a second. Yeah, just looked it up. So, very little time just passed. Because Prabhupada describes that Brahma was very eager to see what Krishna will do now, to see what happens. And also he was a little bit, he knew that maybe it was not such a good thing he did. So he comes back, and then it's also described very nicely that Brahma, he he just appeared like a glowworm, during daytime. Yeah, it's just, this light is just, so small, nobody can really notice it. And also, like a small yogi in front of a great yogi, he doesn't make his fame bigger, but rather he decreases his fame because the greater yogi is just so great, Like that it is described. And so Brahma is really confused. But then what happened? The Gopas actually took on a four-handed Vishnu form. So then he got completely bewildered and he was like, okay, I think this is something strange and that I really did something wrong here. And he begins to understand that actually he's just an insignificant puppet of this Supreme Personality of Godhead, who then drew his Yogamaya curtain. And Brahma kind of awakened. It is described, he opened his eyes, and there was this cosmic manifestation of Vrindavan all around him. Like far out, when I read it again, I only recognized it. It was a cosmic manifestation of Vrindavan, all around him. And in this way, he could understand that, Krishna is really the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then he started his prayers, which is another full chapter. And we had the other day the picture of the four-headed Brahma praying to Krishna. But it was a different pastime, right? It's not this pastime, I think. Is this pastime where he then goes? But no, this is another one where Mathura. Yeah, right, yeah. Right. He asks for darshan, right? And then the servant says, but the servant asks, Brahma is here, and Krishna says, which Brahma? Tell him which Brahma, and he goes back, which Brahma are you? And he's like, what? What is he speaking about? And then he goes in this four-headed Brahma. But actually in this picture, it's also it's in the forest, right? And all right, okay. So it might be this pastime then, yeah. But anyway, in this picture is very nicely pictured that, Krishna is standing there like really bored and Brahma is offering his prayers. So, yeah. And Prabhupada goes on to describe that the whole world is under these waves of the material spell and beings are floating around like straws in water. And so their struggle in this existence is continuing. But as soon as one becomes conscious that he is the eternal servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this Maya or illusory struggle for existence is immediately stopped. Yeah, and that's kind of the link also to this verse again, right? Prabhupada says in the purport that avidya is actually the cause, this ignorance that we suffer like that and that we don't see that we are actually the servants of Krishna. And now it's already quite late. I also wanted to speak a little bit about this one meditation. Maybe I can cut it short just to give you the gist. Probably you've even read it from Bhaktivedanta Maharaj in the Beggar 2, where he speaks about different perception of eating, sleeping, mating, defending. You've read that one? It's far out, and if you read it's like, I don't even want to tell it to you because then you cannot read it anymore. But it's also what is said in the Lila that actually, through all the planetary systems, it says here, they do not know that no kind of material body anywhere within the universe can give life without miseries. The miseries of life, namely birth, death, old age, and diseases, are present everywhere within the material world. So Bhaktivedanta Maharaj describes that this one day he was trying to understand the manifestation of the creation and the different layers of the creation, different planetary systems. And he describes that it was as if his spiritual master had taken compassion on him, and he appeared before him and said, "Come, we go on a little tour with you today." And then he describes like they first go to the depth of the ocean. And he was a little afraid to go there, but he was with his spiritual master, with Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada told him, Don't care, everything will be alright. And then they're at the bottom of the ocean, and Srila Prabhupada tells him, now just listen and absorb. Just listen and observe. Just see what happens. And he made him understand the language these beings there were speaking in. And he could understand that basically all they were speaking about was mating, sleeping, eating and defending. And then they went into the core of the earth. And there were very strange beings there, and he was astonished to see that these beings were so close to us, human beings. And Srila Prabhupada said, yeah, like reading his thoughts, don't you think that human beings don't know about them? There are many people who know about these beings as well. Like that, and then they go down to the lower planetary systems, and up to the medium planetary systems, and up into the higher heavenly planetary systems. And all the time, Srila Prabhupada just tells him, just listen and observe. And he makes him understand the language. And it's always about these four things, just in different varieties. But it's basically just around this, like this point, In every stage of the material world, there's birth, old age, disease, death, and as well there is mating, eating, sleeping, and defending. But then they also went to the spiritual world. Srila Prabhupada took him to the spiritual world, and he describes it like, every cell in his body is like screaming in ecstasy, and he observes how with every sense he can do the work of every other sense, like that. But then, also there he can see they eat, they sleep, they even have union with each other, and they defend. And he's kind of bewildered, and then he understands they only do this to enhance the pastimes of Krishna, actually. And Prabhupada says, yes, you see, you understand, even in the spiritual world there is activity. It's going on. But it's all for the pleasure of Krishna, and it's in full pleasure, and there is no need for these things. It's just out of playful fun they do that. So that is kind of the difference between this world and the spiritual world. And so the same principle applies in the spiritual world and here, that we have to perceive the inaction in the action, and we have to change our consciousness, sharpen our intelligence to really become observers and good listeners, to understand that actually we're not here, we're not a part of this material world, but we're eternal servants of Krishna, and that's where we should aim for. And that's why we have to understand Krishna's opulence and our little mind, and therefore engage in his service as a consequence of that. Hare Krishna. That were some little thoughts on this verse. Thank you very much for attending, and sorry for making mistakes or any shortcomings of my side. If you have any questions, please. Otherwise, I would be also happy to end early, so don't feel pushed to ask a question. Okay. I would say this is in the process. It's just a general description. It's connected to the verses before, right? That actually the one before, that a man engaged in devotional service rids himself of both good and bad reactions even in this life, therefore strive for yoga. So in that sense, it's just a description. What happens if you engage yourself in devotional service? Yeah. Does it answer the question, or?
With the goal of engaging in devotional service, you become a saint or a devotee, or as you're engaging in devotional service, you're a saint?
Right. No, actually, I would say by engaging in devotional service, you're a sage, because you're Atma realizer. You're on the path of understanding Atma. Therefore, you're causing yourself to get knowledge of Paramatma, and that's how you attain Vaikuntha. So that's why this is already like devotion. If you do it in this consciousness, I think that's. If you do it with buddhi yukta, with being linked, he's in here. It's translated as engaged in devotional service, but buddhi actually means intelligence, right? And I was referring last time to the purport in 10.10, where Prabhupada actually describes, only then he describes buddhi yoga actually means to be engaged in devotional service, because Krishna gives us the intelligence, yeah. The Dami Buddhi Yogam Tam. Yena Mamapayanti, how to come to him through buddhi. So, yeah. Okay? Thank you very much. Krantara Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki jai. No, it's for coming through. Can we turn off here, or?
It's okay, just leave it. No. At times, I remember some contemporary saying that it has a problem, so just leave it. Probably just turn on.
Bhagavad